Hi, this is NutriPhysique, and I'm Pam Bagniers, nutritionist and exercise therapist. And today we're going to make sweet potato corn muffins. I'm really excited about them because I just taught a muffin class recently, and it's one of the muffins we featured in the class, and they're really good. They're a combination of sweet potatoes and corn flour, and they're gluten-free, and they're really healthy. And they're loaded with vitamin A, and they're high in protein, so they're a hit all the way around. They're really delicious. So you can use fresh, baked, roasted sweet potatoes if you want to. Just take your sweet potatoes and slice them up, put them in the oven, and roast them until they're tender. Or you can also just buy them in a can and make your life easier. So you can just buy organic sweet potato puree. That's what we're going to use tonight because we're going to eat these for dinner. So we're going to use the ones in the can. And the first step is blending all the wet ingredients together into the blender until it's a batter. And then we're going to combine the wet and the dry ingredients together. But I wanted to first show you my technique for greasing pans. I'm going to use 6 really large muffin cups, because sometimes I just want a gigantic muffin. I never eat the whole muffin because it's too many carbs all at once, but it's just sometimes fun to have a whole big muffin and cut it in half, but eat half of it and then half of it later. My son can eat a whole giant muffin because he's really active and he's only 14 and he's burning it all off, but not many people can eat a giant muffin. So we're also going to make some smaller muffins, and I'm using parchment paper cups for these. And for the giant muffins, I'm going to butter the pans. And the trick is to put a little baggie on your hand, and you don't get all greasy and filled with butter. And then you just butter the pan, and it works great. It's a great little trick. So we're going to start by blending the wet ingredients in the blender. So we're going to start with about 2½ eggs. The recipe only calls for 2 eggs, but instead of cracking it on the side, I smashed one and got about half the egg in there and dumped the other half of the egg on the counter. So we've got a little bit more egg than we need, but it's going to work out just fine with just a tad bit more egg. And then we're going to put in the pureed sweet potato, 1 cup, into the blender. You can eat this for dinner if you love sweet potatoes, but the real thing is just the best when you're eating it for dinner. 1 cup of sweet potato, by the way, is only 200 calories. That's actually less than that. It's about 180 calories, and it contains over 800% of the RDA of your vitamin A for the day. So you're really set when you're having sweet potatoes. Plus they're real high in fiber. Then we're going to add, and I'm always changing things up a little bit. So the recipe calls for coconut milk. I'm going to add a little bit of Greek organic yogurt. It's got some nice probiotics in there for your tummy. It's kind of like using buttermilk. When you see buttermilk in a recipe, you can often use coconut milk. You can often substitute it for yogurt. I like to use Greek yogurt because it's much higher in protein, so then you make your baked goods nice and high in protein. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit here. And then, because I happen to have a little pineapple, crushed pineapple, I'm going to use a little bit because I think they'll be really good in here. We made pineapple coleslaw this week. That's one of my veggies I'm eating. So I've got a little bit leftover crushed organic pineapple. So I'm going to throw some of that in. Not much, probably about 2 tablespoons worth. Still have a little bit left over for some breakfast. So I'm going to blend this up. That's really all you need to do is get it into a nice puree. Then we're going to work on the dry ingredients over here. And I've got in here so far 1.5 cups of actually not just plain corn flour, but it's Bob's Red Mill cornbread mix. So it's a little bit lighter and fluffier than just plain corn flour. And it's also, I've got a gluten-free blend. 1.5 cups of Bob's Red Mill and 1.5 cups of the gluten-free flour that I'm using, which is right now, it's going to be Pamela's. So just half and half, a flour blend and a corn blend. So if you're making these and you don't want them to be gluten-free, you can use 1.5 cups of regular flour, hopefully whole wheat flour, and 1.5 cups of corn flour. This will work out just great. And then I'm going to add my maple syrup, 1/2 cup, because I almost forgot. There is a little bit of sweetener in these muffins, but we're going to get at least a dozen muffins out of this, so 1/2 cup of maple syrup's not bad, and it adds a really good flavor, especially to the other flavors combined with the sweet potatoes and the corn. It's great flavor. So, I almost forgot it. Add that in there. Go. Now to my flour mixture, I'm going to add a teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm going to add a tablespoon of baking powder. And here's a trick. When you're baking gluten-free and it calls for a tablespoon of baking powder, add a heaping tablespoon of baking powder, because it does take a little bit more baking powder to get gluten-free things to rise. And 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I'm not using sea salt, because I pretty much use sea salt all the time. Extra minerals, it tastes really good. So that's what I have around. Salt's really important in the baking process. So I'm just whisking these dry ingredients together. And I'm going to make one more slight change in the recipe, so you can do this too. It's a couple of chocolate chips, because you can't go wrong with adding a few chocolate chips, especially if they're dark chocolate chips. So I'm going to add, about a handful. So it's just a fun surprise when you get a mouthful, handful and 4 chips. That's all that was. And it's just a fun surprise when you get a little chocolate chip in your muffin. Dark chocolate every day is not a bad thing. So now here's a trick about muffins, is you just barely want to combine the dry and the wet ingredients. You don't want to overmix, because they become tough really easily. So I'm going to just barely combine. First of all, I'm going to make sure that my wet ingredients are nice and combined. And then I'm just going to pour them together. And ooh, it's a beautiful orange color. These muffins come out really pretty and a nice color, and they come out, they rise real nice, and they're just delicious. So we're going to mix this just until blended, and then we're done. We're ready to go. I love having muffins in the freezer. When I make these muffins, now I'm going to put 2/3 of them or 3/4 of them right straight into the freezer, because they stay really fresh when you freeze them. They're not so fresh if you put them in the refrigerator. They will get a little stale if you put them in the refrigerator. So it's best to keep the ones you're going to eat in the next day or two on the counter. Keep the rest in the freezer, so that you're not going to let them sit around and get stale. Plus it keeps you from eating too many muffins. Really, we're talking one delicious muffin a day as a carbohydrate, as a complex carbohydrate. It's really all you need. And that's it. So I just combined the batter to where it's just combined. It's a beautiful peachy orange color from the sweet potato. I'm going to fill my muffin cups. We're going to bake, and we're going to eat them up. So I'm back prematurely because I forgot one ingredient. I was melting the butter over there on the stove. So you don't want to forget, it does take 1/2 cup of butter. Can you imagine anything better than sweet potatoes with butter? So I had to fess up and come back on to tell you guys, don't forget the butter. It's very easy to do when it's halfway across the kitchen. on the stove melting because it calls for melted butter. So I'm adding my butter in, then we'll bake. So we've got the finished product here. We have delicious muffins, and we topped them off with a couple pumpkin seeds and some chocolate chips. It came out delicious and it smells really good in here. So now it's tasting. Really good. Make yourself a batch.